What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
We usually analyze the sales structure based on two statistical documents, the AEB report, which reflects the number of cars shipped by brands to dealers, and Tustad's report on GIBDD registrations, which shows a more realistic picture of what is happening. This allows, among other things, to track discrepancies between desired and actual sales volumes. However, under the current conditions, there is nothing more to analyze. The majority of brands have stopped local production and import deliveries of cars, so there is no point in trying to compare figures. In March, the market collapsed, so it is time to summarize the half-year results not in comparison with last year, but by comparing the first quarter, when sales were somehow progressing, with the second quarter, in order to understand who is still selling cars in the current conditions. If we divide the first half of the year into the first and second quarters, the second quarter sold only 25% of the total for the 6 months, that is, sales in the second quarter fell threefold, to 88,000 units versus 264,000 in the first quarter. Well, looking at the solid redness in the tables, one can also try to estimate who fell the least and benefited from the situation. Although here the answer will be predictable, it is Chinese brands and Lada. However, let's go in order. Usually the premium segment even in crisis years remained more stable and less susceptible to general trends. However, this time everything is different. In the middle of March, the European Union and the United States banned the import of expensive cars to Russia, and at the end of March a similar ban was imposed by Japan in the absence of supplies. There was simply nothing to support sales. The stocks of premium brands are not very large, although photos of the Mercedes-Benz parking lots are impressive. This is why most luxury brands saw their sales in the second quarter fall even more than 3 times the market average. For example, Mercedes-Benz in the second quarter realized only 18% of the total volume for the half-year, BMW 17%, and Lexus even 10%, that is, the sales of the Japanese in the second quarter collapsed 10 times, to 229 cars. This is explained by the same low stock of cars. In fact, the same Lexus in reality sold even more than stated in the statistics of AEB. In the report there are 1,783 cars and 2,363 cars were registered, that is, 1/3 more, but almost all these cars of 2021 year of manufacture. In other words, there is a sale of stock. The situation is the same for brands with small sales volumes, for example, Audi, Jeep, Cadillac, Porsche, all of them reported to AEB about a smaller number of sold cars than actually registered. Genesis brand has the most curious statistics here. AEB states about 859 sold cars and 36% drop, but in fact 1,450 cars were registered. That is, 87% more than in the same period of the previous year, APPG. In the second half of the year statistics will surely straighten out, but Koreans have not yet announced about leaving Russia, so Genesis has chances for relative success. But it is probably the only premium brand that has a chance to sell anything in the second half of the year. Contrary to usual, we are seeing a real crisis in the premium segment. The only thing that will be interesting to look at in the second half of the year is the volume of new premium cars imported through grey channels. It will be reflected in the statistics of registrations compared to the AEB data. After all, the practice of importing cars from the UAE, USA and Europe is gaining momentum. In addition to the deficit, it is also spurred by huge price markups by dealers, which makes it banally more profitable to bring an expensive car in the grey. While total premium sales in the second quarter fell by more than 80%, in the medium and budget segment they fell by only 76%. However, the situation here is not homogeneous either. Those brands that remained in Russia in the second quarter realized about 25% of the half-year volume. Such results were achieved by major players like Hyundai and Kia, and Lada even slightly more, 28.5%. Those who froze deliveries and left the market lost more. For example, Renault's sales on the background of withdrawal from Russia in the second quarter collapsed 4 times, dying dealers sold out 6,500 cars, or 20% of the volume for 6 months. At the same time, mass brands more clearly demonstrate the stacking of warehouses, almost all of those who stopped supplying cars underestimated the AEB indicators relative to reality. For example, Skoda dealers sold 16.5 thousand cars, although the brand reported 14.5 thousand deliveries. Toyota has 21.5 thousand registrations against 18.5 thousand in AEB statistics, Mitsubishi has 8.2 thousand against 7 and 2,000, Mazda has 7.3 against 6.8 thousand. All this speaks about the prevalence of demand over supply. Despite the phenomenal growth of prices and dealer markups, buyers have been shoveling out the rest of cars from the stocks little by little. In the second half of the year, the figures may become even stranger because dealers still have some reserves, but new shipments of the above-mentioned brands will tend to zero. For the same reason, one may not look at the success of budget Chevrolet, which at the beginning of this year managed to sell 450 units. Deliveries of cars from Uzbekistan have been stopped long ago. However, it is not quite correct to assume that the major players are more stable based only on the prevalence of AEB volumes over registrations. Yes, the situation is the opposite for the leaders. Lada reported 74.5 thousand cars sold, although only 73,000 cars were registered, and Kia and Hyundai have similar results. That is, the stocks of the brands are large and the demand is fully covered. But in fact, it also shows that the prohibitive growth of prices becomes a reason for refusal to buy new cars. UAZ demonstrates this most clearly. In the report of AEB in the first half of the year there are 9.7 thousand cars, but only 4 handled. Dio Tandit, 5,000 cars were registered, the real difference from the declared more than 2 times. That is, there are fewer and fewer people willing to buy Hunter for 1.5 million and Patriot for 2 to 3 million. Buyers are changing their course and checking out fresh used cars abroad. As we expected, the main beneficiaries of the current market crisis can be considered Chinese brands. Yes, the sales slump has affected them as well, not least because of the same pricing policy, when models coming to Russia sometimes turn out to be 2 to 3 times more expensive than in their home country. However, if we look at the results of the 3 largest players, the situation is still not as difficult as for non-Chinese brands. Thus, Chery in the first half of the year sagged by 20%, Haval by 18%, and Geely by only 13%. The situation is even more clearly reflected in the sales in the second quarter. Haval in April-June sold 30% of the total volume for 6 months, that is, sales fell only twice, which is even better than that of Lada, Hyundai and Kia. Geely has 38%, and Chery all 40%, that is, their sales in the second quarter relative to the first quarter decreased by a third, which against the general background seems to be a success. Changan, which lost half of its volume, is doing less well. But the sales of the young brand Exceed, controlled by Chery, have grown, albeit partly on the effect of last year's low base. In addition, the brand continues to fill dealerships and warehouses. 3.8 thousand cars were registered against 4.3 thousand in the AEB report. The comparative success of Chinese brands is also reflected in the list of the best-selling models. While in 2021 there was not a single Chinese in the top 25, in the first half of the year Haval Jolion and Chery Tiggo 7 Pro climbed right into the middle of the list, taking 15th and 16th place, respectively. Moreover, in June, the Jolion made it to the top 5 best-selling cars in Russia, having retained the circulation of 900 copies relative to the APPG. And in total in June, there were already 4 Chinese models in the top 25. The list also includes Geely Coolray, Haval F7, Haval F7X and Geely Tugala. The last model clearly shows what a steep peak the market is in. To get among the best sellers, Geely had enough to sell 257 copies of the Tugala. Let's see how the top 25 will look like in the second half of the year, when Renault, Mazda and Volkswagen models will fall out of it. The crisis has broken the usual course of sales. Many dealers artificially inflate prices and slow down demand in order to stretch the stock of cars for the next few months and provide themselves with a piece of bread. And if half a year ago the situation could be slightly influenced by brand representatives, which at least somehow curbed the appetites of dealers, today we find ourselves in conditions of virtually uncontrolled pricing. Against the backdrop of jacked up prices, the market of grey cars imported from abroad is flourishing again. Of course, these are primarily passable used cars aged 3 to 5 years, requiring payment of a minimum customs duty. However, those who want to buy a new car also look towards foreign countries and often neighboring ones. For example, you can save money and bring a new car from Kazakhstan or other EAEU countries without duties at all but against the background of still favorable exchange rates and fierce dealer markups. Even the purchase of a car with the payment of duty is often quite a profitable option. But it is pointless to speculate about what will happen to the market at least by the end of the year. Optimists talk about reviving lending and incentives to stimulate demand are back. Ideally, sales can go up. Even with standing factories and virtually blocked imports, dealer warehouses will not be empty for several months. But no one will make a forecast beyond this time horizon today. In conclusion, the first half of the year has revealed significant shifts in the car market, particularly with the rise of Chinese manufacturers breaking into the top 15 rankings. The premium crisis has posed challenges for established brands, while the influx of grey imports has further complicated the landscape. As we move forward, it will be crucial for both consumers and industry players to adapt to these changes and understand the implications for the future of automotive trends. The evolving dynamics present both opportunities and challenges that will shape the market in the coming months. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more insights on this ever-changing industry.